However, tonight we're pleased to have Trymaine Lee. Lee is a Pulitzer Prize and Emmy Award winning journalist and MSNBC contributor. He's the host of the Into America podcast, where he covers the intersection of Blackness, power, and politics. A contributing author to the 1619 Project, he has reported for the New York Times, the Huffington Post, and the New Orleans Times. A Thousand Ways to Die is his new book, or his first book. Lee will be in conversation with Yamiche Alcindor, a White House correspondent for NBC News, covering the second administration of President Trump. She previously served as an NBC Washington correspondent, covering former President Biden's administration and former Vice President Harris's presidential campaign. She's also won a Peabody Award for her coverage of the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol. So let's welcome them both tonight.
How y'all doing tonight? You know, it's cliche to say that y'all could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, but y'all here with us. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being here. It's such a pleasure to sit down and talk to, I call him my journalism dad, but he really wants to be my journalism big brother.
That sounds old. That sounds old.
But I call him my journalism dad. But of course, Trymaine has given us this amazing book, and we are going to jump right into it. I will say that at the end, we're going to have about 20 minutes or so of audience questions. So as you're listening to us talk, please jot down your questions. We'll be ready for them after. So the first question I have for you, Trymaine, I remember when you got this book deal and when you started talking about writing a book and then to all the way to when it actually came out. It evolved over time, but I want to ask you, what made you want to write this book, and also how did it change over time?
Yeah, thank you very much. It's been 10 years since I got the book deal. And so it feels like I have a full-grown adolescent child here being born. The earliest seeds began back in 2003 when I was an intern at the Philadelphia Daily News. And at that time, I thought I was going to be like the next Richard Wright, telling our stories in like fanciful prose, like rich dialogue. And I ended up on the city beat, which means I'm covering police and crime. And I ended up covering the case of a young man named Kevin Johnson, who I think about to this day. He was shot during a robbery for his Allen Iverson jersey in Southwest Philly, and ended up shooting him in the back of the neck. And he ended up being paralyzed from the neck down. And I managed to get into his hospital room, and I thought I was going to find a young man completely shattered, right, completely broken. But what I found was partly true. He was a quadriplegic, so he couldn't move his body. But there was this buoyance about Kevin and this big smile that he had. And he talked about his dreams of walking one day and his literal dreams of playing basketball and feeling every sensation as if he still had his mobility. And he's smiling. And I look across his bed and I see his mother, her eyes filled with tears. And we're both realizing that he'll never walk again. And then soon after that, she started talking about the cost just to get him home. It was a special wheelchair. It was a special van. It was a ramp to their row home in North Philly to get him into the house. And then it was the widening of the doors. And then it was new electrical outlets to sustain his breathing machine. And all this was just a financial cost just to get him home. And by that point, I understood how often this kind of physical destruction happens, but I never fully considered those other costs. And so I said to myself, you know what? I know people don't care about the Kevin Johnsons of the world, but maybe they care that we're all paying a price in some way, right? Because most people who are gunshot victims don't have private insurance. They have public insurance. So we're all paying this price. A little cynical, but I said, you know what? That's how I rope you in. And then we'll talk about the cost of community and family every single day. I tried to sell this story every step of the way, and I couldn't. New York Times, I couldn't get it off anywhere until I finally got a book deal in 2015 to write this book called $1 Million Bullets. And it was like the true cost of gun violence in this country. I'm writing it, traveling across the country, mapping everything out. And then 2 years into writing it, I have a heart attack. A widowmaker. And so 98% of my left anterior descending artery was blocked by a blood clot. No family history, no warning signs, no high blood pressure, high cholesterol, just this heart attack that almost killed me. And my 5 going on 6-year-old daughter at the time, Nola, was asking me, Daddy, how and why? right? And I'm trying to be as honest as I possibly can. And I promised her when she was in the womb that I'd never lie to her. So I'm gonna tell you the truth. And in order to tell her the truth, I had to be honest and tell myself the truth and really engage with what was bearing down on my heart. And what was bearing down on my heart was, covering life and death, right? At that point, I used to have a police scanner over my shoulder. And I would get there, I would hear the, shootings, stabbings, the fights. And I would get there before the police really got there, because these are the emergency lines. And I'd find young Black men, my age, same sneakers as me. Look, I see the same pain that I could imagine in my own people's face. I saw it in their people's faces. And going through the routine as a journalist of trying to get the details and get the pictures and go through all that. And I was carrying like little bits of ribbon from every murder, right? And I was a police and crime reporter in Philly and Trenton and then New Orleans. So I was gathering all of this ribbon and all of these names and all these stories and all of this death. And as a young journalist, I didn't have, as a young man, I should say, I didn't have a healthy way to really process it or even identify what I now know to be this kind of trauma. And so I was doing what I was doing. I'm drinking more, I'm hanging out, I'm doing everything but engage with what's really bearing down my heart. But then that's just me as a journalist. My family history of violence goes back to the Jim Crow South in 1921, when my grandmother's 12-year-old brother was shot and killed in a sundown town, which sent my family into the waves of the Great Migration. I exist because of an act of gun violence. So my grandparents met in New Jersey, decades after they fled the South. And so the idea that there is this ethereal connection to gun violence, the gun violence I'm covering, right, and this family history was bearing down on me in a way that changed the entire trajectory of the book, from $1 million bullets, the true cost in that way, to the cost that I almost paid, and widening the aperture of what violence actually is, right? Long before the violence of a trigger and a bullet, there's systemic violence. There's the silent violence we carry within. There's the inherited trauma. And then there's the historic trauma that Black people in particular, in a specific kind of way, have experienced. So that's a long answer of saying, like, this is why the book is now what the book is. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
We like long answers in book talk. It's good. It's okay. I remember visiting you after you had that heart attack and being shook, frankly, and telling my mom about it. My mom being like, Trymaine's a young man. What do you mean he had a heart attack? I wonder, because I remember when I went to go visit you in Brooklyn, we weren't talking about that. We were just talking about how scary it was, and how much you wanted to live for Nola, and how much you wanted to listen to your body more and get healthy. At what point, and we really talked a lot about physicality, how long did it take you to say, what part of this is me carrying all of this? And how did that end up sort of impacting the way that you saw the book?
Yeah. The process, the post almost dying process, was like 3 years of me seeking clarity, of getting healthy, of physically getting healthy, but also becoming much more mindful and meditating and find ways to quiet the noise and unpack the clutter as it happens. And so during that period, though, there wasn't a single night that would go by that I didn't think about dying, where I think, like, am I going to die tonight? Is it tomorrow? When I started traveling for work again, is it going to happen in a hotel room? Is my daughter going to find me? It was terrifying. But I got to the point where I fully understood that I can only control what I can control. And I wasn't going to give in to death or the weight. I was going to get as healthy as possible. But in that clarity, and that's when, again, that widening of the aperture of what violence is, and what does it mean to hold those shards, those sharp pieces in your hand? What does it mean for me, but also what does it mean for those who've also experienced this? And what does trauma mean? And what does it mean to hand pieces of trauma to your children? What does it mean to exist coiled and bound up, right? What about the broadest sense of violence, right? The systems. It's violent when you don't have access to quality healthcare or water, right? Or air. It's violence. And we experience that in spades, right? And so I didn't touch the book for another year and a half or 2 years. I didn't write a single word. I was running 5Ks and 10Ks, and I was just getting busy, and I was meditating every day, and I was fishing, and I was like,
That's what I mean. I was like, you were doing a whole lot and not writing.
No, listen, I take fishing very seriously. Because one, it's peaceful to me, and I can get hyper-focused on something, especially at that time, getting hyper-focused on something other than oh my God, it's all that stuff. And so a real clarity and peace kind of set in with the fact that I almost died, but I did not. I am here another day. And I do have people who need me here, and I need to be here. And so the book where I was like, I wasn't worried about no publishers, I wasn't worried about no book, I wasn't worried about none of that. But then slowly I came back to it, and it was like, it became the book that it was supposed to be all along. What I was trying to do in the beginning was like, it was an important work that I was trying to do, and I was trying to get people's attention. But the level of execution was high. It was just a lot going on. Now I had a clear path, and it begins with my own family, and much more personally than I'd ever intended to be.
I want to ask a follow-up question about that, but before I do that, one more question on like the burden of carrying trauma. I obviously just was working with you at NBC and MSNBC. You kept on going into those shattered glass atmospheres and in those environments where you had to pick up shards of glass. How did you figure out, and maybe this is something that everyone can take from this room, how did you figure out how to take in the burden of trauma, of taking in stories, of wanting to help, but also not feeling like it was going to give you another heart attack, frankly?
Yeah, no. I think for a very long time, and this is like something I had to work on, and I'm at peace with it now, I just don't trust anybody to tell our stories but me, right? I mean, I have some great colleagues, Yamiche, you're one of them, great friends who are amazing journalists and amazing storytellers and truth seekers, but I just don't trust anybody but me. So I would go in time and again because I knew how to tell these stories, and I knew why they mattered, and I knew the framing. I knew how to do it on MSNBC, on the air. I knew how to kick it with everybody and make sure we're getting it right. I knew how people would trust me, and I trust them. I knew how to do that. But then I think through the pandemic is when I said, you know what, maybe Shaquille Brewster could do this. You know, I mean, maybe I don't really, honestly, because I was like, I'm going to be on the road. It's high stress. You know, you've been out there in North Ferguson. You're getting 3 hours of sleep, and then now you're back in it, and police are shooting rubber bullets at you, and there's tear gas, and there's the emotional energy and the heat. It's a lot. Not eating, not drinking water. It's like it's a lot. And I was at the point where it's like, I don't need to do that. I don't have anything to prove, but also I just had to trust that like there are other people that can tell this story. But it took a long time. I mean, to this day, I'm still kind of like an old ball player. Like I can still play. But you find new ways to tell the story. I'm still doing that, but I had to get clear like that lifestyle was just because you commit yourself so fully to it. You know, I see some of my old journalism friends in here. You commit yourself so fully to the mission that you're blind to your own needs, and it's not the same. But I remember hearing, I don't know if it was one of Malcolm X's daughters or it was somebody, and they were talking about their dads. Like, you care about the people. What about your people? Right? So we're trying to tell these stories and make sure that history remembers us, right? And it's like, well, my daughter home, and she likes seeing me on TV, but maybe she needs me around for longer. And so I had to get real about that.
I was getting around to whether or not you were going to bring up Nola, because I was like, I know Nola impacted that, but okay.
No, but she honestly, and it's like, this is my little girl. She's 13 now, so she's not the little one. It's so important to my maturation as a man, but also a journalist in this context.
Yeah. And
like really thinking about what really matters. And I don't know how many of you have had near-death experiences, but it's like, oh, I'm gonna miss the science project. I'm gonna miss the prom. I'm gonna miss that, and what that absence would mean, and having family members who, like my mother, lost her father to gun violence. How she describes what it's like to not have your father when you need him. I just didn't want to be in that position. Yeah, so it forced me to reconcile a lot.
Yeah. So you talked about putting a lot of your family history and your personal history into this book. Tell us a little bit about what you think are the sort of, maybe, I know we're all going to read the book, so I don't give away too much, but tell a little bit about the personal that you decided to put in this book, and what was that like? Because as a journalist, you do the exact opposite. You're not supposed to talk that much about your personal.
Yeah, we're taught again to be arm's length with our subject matter. I think in the best sense is to be sober-minded and not intoxicated by emotion trying to tell the story. But I always thought it was a fallacy anyway, because it's like you have to like consciously deny what you're actually seeing. Like, don't get too close and don't see what you're actually seeing. But in my clarity, in my deciding to push into the story and be as open as possible, it was important that I tell family stories that had never been spoken publicly before. And I've been doing a bad job at not giving away all the book, but it's a journey. So hopefully you take the journey anyway. And so that first killing, well, I'll go back to 1976, 2 years before I was born. My grandfather was murdered. And growing up, I always knew about his death, And I knew about the absence that created in my family. And there's like an old portrait that I grew up with. And see, this I've been having like tears sitting under my eyes for like 3 months. Every time I start talking about this especially. But there's this picture. It was like before he was killed, and my family was whole and beautiful, and my uncles in their military uniforms, and my mom with the afro, and my aunts, and they're all so beautiful and young. My mother's like 23. Everybody just looks so good, and my grandfather, big man, he got this salt and pepper hair, just beautiful man, and my grandmother, and that was like one of the last times that my family was whole. So they owned an apartment in Camden, New Jersey, and they rented it out to a guy where a guy left a deposit, and he disappeared for like 10 weeks. Came back, won his money back, and my grandfather told him, like, no, it's non-refundable. I'll see you in court. A court date was set. He came back and murdered my grandfather. Came and shot him. And so again, you grow up with what that means. And talking to my grandmother, later in life a little bit, but really my mother and my aunts and uncles about what it means to have that absence. And so that was always going to be a part of the story. To kind of say that even your reporter here, who from covering these things, has not been able to evade the long reach of gun violence. But what I learned along the process of writing this book, that it wasn't the first murder in my family. Back in the Jim Crow South, I mentioned a few minutes ago, my great-grandparents were tenant farmers. So they worked land that they would never own. And it was December, around settlement time, which is basically the time where landowners just rip people off. They keep Black people in a steady sense and state of debt, basically. So you're always in debt to these people. Cornelius was his name, 12 years old, was sent off to run errands, ended up getting shot and killed in a sundown town in a neighboring county. And even as someone who exists in the historic spaces, right, I always thought sundown towns were like a colloquial thing, like the neighborhood you don't want to be because something bad could happen. No, the newspaper of the time documented that the white men of the town came together to vote to make sure Black people didn't have a place in the community, right? Couldn't vote. This is post, Reconstruction. Couldn't vote, couldn't work after a certain time. They voted. And the newspapers of the day said Fitzgerald figured out a way to handle the Negro problem the way no other city in America could, right? And this city was also hailed because it was a city that was formed by former Confederate and Union veterans. So even the streets crisscrossed with Confederate names and Union names. So everybody loved this place. And it didn't matter Union or Confederate sympathizers. There's a current of white supremacy that runs under the place. So he's killed there. My family joins the migration, heads north to Philadelphia first and then South Jersey. And then in the early 1950s, a state trooper kills my grandmother's second brother under real mysterious circumstances. And I found newspaper accounts. And the one headline says, "Trooper's gun kills youth," right? Like it just popped up and killed the youth under real mysterious circumstances, just like Michael Brown, right? And when you read the story and I write about this, it doesn't make any sense. And then it's my grandfather in 76. And then my stepbrother was murdered in Camden in 96. And then in the early 2000s, I had a cousin killed in Atlantic City, and his brother was involved in a botched robbery turned murder. So he's in prison for the rest of his life. And so this specter of violence, even as we sought refuge in the North, right? Oftentimes it came with just a different accent, right? And so like, as I'm being open and vulnerable, the book began to take shape. We're starting with me reconciling with the idea of violence and a blood clot and a bullet being different things, but both having the power to undo a life. And then going through geography and time with my own family to track Black history and going back to the guns for slave cycle in Africa, right? People don't understand, we tend to think that, enslaved Africans were some natural byproduct of wars. When in fact, as gun technology is rising, European powers, some of which would only trade in guns for people, right? And so we're forced out of Africa with the muzzle of a gun at our backs. And here we are at the hell of the Western world. And that psychic kind of connection between that killing tool and our very bodies, before we get through hundreds of years of enslavement, where in some places white men were required to have guns to make sure they could police Black bodies, the predecessor of the police departments, right? And as we move through seeking freedom and moving through the first time, the fullness of freedom, fleeting because more gun violence will come, right? After the fall of Reconstruction, with the compromise of 1877, federal troops leave and leave us to the whims of the planter class, right? And so it shaped us along the way. So I was very intentional about let's go to the beginning and then move our way up through my own family, but also our stories.
How difficult was it to sort of learn about history and know that there are sundown towns and there's this great migration, but then to realize, wait, I'm part of this,
Yeah.
right? Like this isn't something where, because to me, I think you can never really hear the word Great Migration again and not think of Cornelius, right?
Right,
Like it's
yeah.
like that name now sticks with me.
Yeah.
That I wonder when you think about it that way, like just how hard was it to be doing this research, writing this book, but also realizing I'm existing because of all of this.
That part is really wild to like, if that wouldn't have happened, I'm not here, right? It wouldn't have happened. But I think the more surprising part of all this, like in discovery, you think it was violent in the Jim Crow South. You think it was bad. It's much worse than you could imagine. I relied heavily on census records and other data, like to create a sense of like place and where people were. But I leaned on contemporaneous accounts and newspaper accounts. The amount of violence, white on black violence, black on black violence, there were so many killings. It's actually amazing, over retribution, over somebody stole some land, over somebody owed you a debt, over somebody black refused to do A, B, or C. The amount of we think we know with the lynchings, and we think about the braid of a rope, but people were getting shot a lot. And I think that part opened my eyes, and that people were, again, this is only decades after emancipation, right? It's not long after emancipation. And so I think that part was tough, because it's not so abstract and distant, right? Especially when you can situate your people, you know where they were. They were living in these communities where people were getting shot and killed and lynched and strung to trees and dragged out of jails. And sometimes they would kill the wrong person. And it's like, oh, my bad, right? No, seriously, it was terrible. So that was bad.
Talk to me about researching this book. You talk about census data. Did you end up having to travel to research? Did you end up finding and I also, in that research, did you ever sort of come across something that stops you in your tracks and say, wow, this is like a piece of history that I'm holding in my hand?
Well, first of all, a lot of digital research. So I relied heavily on county records, census state records, federal records. Newspaper.com is great. Ancestry is great. Putting pieces together. I don't think anything really stopped me in my tracks beyond like the sheer amount of the violence. I think seeing Cornelius's death certificate, that stopped me in my tracks. Age 12, cause of death, gunshot wound, right? And thinking about like Tamir Rice, 12 years old, and it was just so simple, and the mundanity of it all. Like, it's just age 12, cause of death, gun. And that should never. Those never. Age 12. And seeing it, that stopped me in my tracks.
One thing that, you talked a bit about sort of the gun industry when you think about sort of Europeans and technology, but talk a bit about what you learned about the gun industry and also what you want people to learn in the book about the gun industry.
Yeah. The gun industry is like one of the most unregulated industries in this country. And I can't help but think about events in the last couple of weeks, where there was this military strike on an alleged Venezuelan drug boat. And the issue is, we know where it's coming from, so let's stop it before it lands in America. When it comes to guns, there's no dispute where they're coming from. It's coming from Sturm Ruger and Smith & Wesson and these factory towns all across the country. We know it goes to the wholesale market, right? These big wholesalers that sell to retail stores like Bass Pro Shop. And then there are thousands of federally licensed dealers, individuals, right? Then there's the gun show market. All these good guys with guns are also some of the bad guys with guns. There's no mystery. These guns are being siphoned off, and everyone knows. There's no illusion. Besides rising ghost guns, the vast majority of weapons used in violent crime in this country all started legally. That's the part. You don't need a military strike on a gunboat. What about the iron pipeline, right? That goes from cities in Massachusetts and throughout the South, and to the South, where guns are really easy to get. Some states have constitutional carry, where it's assumed that you just have the right to carry because you're an American citizen. And so, I think it's, but also, and I paint some of this picture in the book, where you have the South Side of Chicago or DC or any number of places that are, experiencing gun violence at a certain rate. There are other communities where people are putting food on the table with guns and making the guns. And I talked to a number of folks who work in some of these factories, and talking about, like, at a certain point, it does dawn on you, like, where are all these guns going, right? And what responsibility do they have and do we have, right? Once they leave the legal realm. But there's so much money, billions of dollars in profit. And people don't understand also that what's fueling the gun industry, right? It is the NRA and other groups. And the modern day gun rights movement, as we understand it, was sparked by Brown v. Board of Education. Before that, they were still sport shooting. There wasn't this drive to say you have to protect yourself. It was Black people getting some piece of freedom and equality that was used to weaponize this great concern. Like, now it's time to arm yourselves, because what's next?
And when you think about the future of the gun industry, do you see, I mean, this question always comes up every maybe 6 months, every year, when you have a shooting that really sort of stops people in their tracks. You think of Uvalde, where something like 19 little kids are killed, or Sandy Hook. I covered that, thinking, oh, the world is going to shift so much. And then obviously I was a naive 24-year-old, didn't realize that nothing was going to change. But I wonder, when you look at the future of the gun industry, is there anything that you think changes, or is it just going to be a machine that keeps going?
I think, and I hate to even use this individual's name, but Charlie Kirk said that the cost of liberty, right, is some gun death, right? He paid that cost. There are a lot of people who believe just that it doesn't matter if babies in Sandy Hook. I talked to Eric Holder before he left office, and he said he'll never forget seeing those pictures, and that everybody should see what these weapons do to children, right? But guns are such a part of not just this idea and notion of liberty and this exceptionalism and taming. Remember, taming a savage land and savage people. Guns used to exploit the land, but you have to exploit the people first, right? But also it's connected to this sense of American manhood, right? There's this John Wayne, there's this manhood connected to it. So without your guns, right? But that's an insecure nation. And we are a very insecure nation. So I don't expect much different, but I think the hope is, if there's any hope, if we're going to curb the incessant flow of these guns and the industry getting, wealthier as we're bleeding, it's the approach that they use against big tobacco, right? Direct harm. And there's a great expectation that that there's a strong possibility that these guns will be used in crime and violence, right? That's the only, I don't have an imagination big enough to imagine an America without guns, but I think there are enough people of goodwill, and hopefully, even with a book like this, understanding it's not just that young man, and we see it every single day on the news. We're projecting a lot on those young men, and that's not to say we shouldn't be holding people accountable, but the issue is sometimes we fall into, let's use Donald Trump's words, he's threatening to occupy certain cities. It doesn't matter 5 years, 10 years, they're born to be criminals, right? That's a half humanity. And so as long as we can look at these people as half human and bad things happening to bad people in bad neighborhoods, then there's no real reason to take action until you situate us all in this system and all of us have culpability, right? And then you're forced to acknowledge the role of society and economies and racism and all that in how we got to where we are.
Yeah. You bring up Charlie Kirk. I'm also thinking of, the death of Melissa Hortman and her husband in Minnesota. There's so many we're in this period right now where I think the nation is reflecting on what real gun violence and it looks like, and also sort of how we as a nation sort of move forward in this way. Has writing this book impacted the way that you've just sort of been able to process the last week, the last few months, if you go back to Minnesota?
I think, the baseline is America secretes violence from its pores, right? And it's not the first time. Lest we forget, in the 60s, Robert F. Kennedy, JFK, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Bobby Hutt, all the Panthers, like this is the baseline. It's just convulsing at this moment. But I think it's so normalized that we're not shocked by it anymore. And I think that's an obscenity, that it doesn't bother us. It doesn't bother us quite enough.
I've been talking to people about this moment and the last 2 weeks. And one thing that even especially young journalists I've been talking to say they regret watching the videos of some of the things that we've seen because that trauma is staying with people. Sort of, what would you tell people in this moment in terms of just like the way that we are all, as you're covering this story, you're consuming so much, or if you're paying attention, you're consuming so much of this?
I can't help but think about two things, especially when it comes to Black death in particular, and then we can broaden it out, that it's always been, there's always been the spectacle of Black death. Look at those old lynching photos, and people are there with their children as a man is hanging dead, right? And every time you consume that, I think we're chipping away a little piece of our humanity. We shouldn't be seeing that. There's one story that didn't make it in the book, and this is, again, this idea.
You love stuff like that. What didn't make it?
Yeah, this is this is terrible. So you might want to. It's bad. No. And I also want to say one thing that I will get to. It sounds like this book is heavy.
You are not about to take my next question. So
okay, I'll get to that.
We're not doing that, Trymaine.
You know what? I'm gonna save that story. But the reality is that we have this appetite where in America we entertain ourselves with murder and violence.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, if you think about George Floyd, I mean, I instantly regretted watching George Floyd, especially when he's calling for his mother, and I was literally pregnant with my son, and I was just thinking, like, wait, what is this world?
You can't unsee it. And even the Charlie Kirk, it's terrible. It's all terrible. We're not meant to see what we see on a loop. And again, when it comes to the spectacle of Black death, we tend to get that loop over. And think about what it was like to watch George Floyd murdered 1,000 times, right?
So the question you were trying to steal from me, but I can now ask, is you, of course, a lot of this is heavy, but there is joy.
Yeah.
There is happiness. And to know you is to know someone who knows how to enjoy himself. Especially, I remember early 2000s, Trymaine, when I had just gotten allowed to drink.
A lot. Chill,
and Trymane's like, just try an old fashioned, you'll love it. And I'm like, I just started drinking. Like, what is an old fashioned?
Chill. This is Trymaine 4.0. This is different.
Right. This
so,
like, to know you is to know that you like to have a good time.
I do.
So tell me about the joy and the happiness in this book.
I think, and it is a heavy book, and there's a lot going on, but I think it hurts so bad because of the joy and because of the love, right? And because of, it's not just how many of us they killed, it's how we survived and what it takes to survive and why we're fighting to survive. And the pressure, especially as Black men, to make sure we are there for our families and our communities and the next generation. And it's all so fragile. But again, you're holding the precarity in one hand and the preciousness and the joy in the other. And so I think this book is certainly a journey. And you got to get through some of that dark stuff to understand the bigger picture of why it matters. And the bigger, point to me, and this is part of my entire career, I imagine a big quilt of stories. And ultimately, when you look at that quilt, at the end of the day, when I write my last article, my last book, it's ain't nothing wrong with us. Hey, you want to understand what's wrong with us? Let's look at the machinery built around us, right? Because we are a strong people and a beautiful people, right? And there've always been people there, even allies, from the beginning. It always rubs me the wrong way when we're talking about these Confederate statues and all that. And some people will defend the white supremacy, and they were men of their times. Well, they were abolitionists too, and they were men of their times, right? So there's always been this tension, but always in the name of humanity. And that brings me great hope. And also, we have to not be afraid to wrestle down the dark parts. Ignoring it doesn't help us. Because what happened to me? You just take a piece and you sit it here. You take a piece, you sit it there, and you never fully process it. Until what? Right? It shatters you. And so me finding clarity and peace and a kind of freedom in acknowledging what hurts me and being able to talk about it and breathe through it and talk to my homeboys about it, right? How we're feeling and how we're handling this stress. I hope that brings other people's joy, that we could be free to speak on what hurts us.
What was the common denominator that you found as you were doing your research on your family, but also on the history of Black people that allowed people to find joy?
Yeah.
You think of, your mother and your grandmother, they went on, they had you, you're a joyful person. Yeah. I wonder, when you look at even going all the way back to those accounts, of course, Cornelius is killed, his family's moving north, but they're still somehow probably making jokes on the train up because that's somehow how Black people figure out a way to just move on. So I wonder, I always think it's laughter, it's sort of comedy, because that's sort of the way that my family is and the way that so many Black people that I spend time with process things. But I wonder if there was anything else that you found in your research and in writing this.
I think on one hand, understanding for the first time, really, feeling the absence of my grandfather, right? How that really hurt. I cried for the first time writing this book on my grandfather. And I had never cried for him before because it was just a matter of fact. And then it was a matter of feeling where I felt it. And thinking about my grandmother who lost a husband and 2 brothers to murder. But to her dying day, she would say, I'm blessed by the best. And she was a faithful woman. And I can remember being in her house and so busy because my uncle lived next door, my aunt lived around the corner, everybody's moving through. And there's a sense of joy and togetherness and it cracking up, right? Characters, but also like the kind of people that never stop. Have a child murdered in the South. You get to the North, right? You're there and there's more violence. But my grandfather is growing vegetables like he did back in Georgia and going over the bridge to Philly and selling that at the market, right? Finding a way to push forward And it's like, planting a tree and not knowing if you'll ever be able to bear fruit, eat the fruit from the tree, but you're doing it for the next generation. That is beautiful. The idea that those who aren't even born yet, you're sacrificing and giving, and that is love. And so that makes me feel really good of like the stock we come from, not perfect people, right? But people who believe in family and believe in love and are willing to do whatever it takes to make sure we are as whole as possible. And so that at the end of the day just makes me feel really proud to be from where I'm from.
We're going to take a round of applause for that.
Thank you.
We're going to take questions in about 5 minutes, so just get ready for your questions. I have just a couple more, which is, one, tell me a little bit about how this process changed you. You talk about the 10-year arc of this. I've seen you evolve. I mean, I thought maybe it was just with becoming more mature with the less drinking, maybe a little bit more less partying. The baby
it's not less, it's better, it's better
down,
drinking. It's
right?
a higher quality of liquor.
I mean, the baby calmed me down, right? Like babies calm you down because you just can't be drunk and do bath time. It just don't work. But I wonder.
I love bath time with mommy. She's always so fun.
Right. But
she smells funny, but
right. Less brunches for me. But I wonder for you, how the process of writing this book changed you.
I mean, I think I actually did mature a lot, right? So 10 years, I went from a young man to a fully grown man. Seeing my daughter growing, it was important for me to be the best example of a father I possibly could be. That changed me. Learning that I have to have patience. I was never in a rush before, but you have to let the process happen. And I think a seed of something I kind of thought I believed, but it was put into practice through this experience is everything is always going to be all right. Not perfect, not the way you planned it, not the way you even expected sometimes, but it will always be okay if you just trust that you're putting one foot in front of the other. And for me, that was like very important. Time management, right? It's so many lessons, especially as a journalist. I think understanding how to I always thought I was a storyteller, but how to tell a story in 90,000 words or 88,000 words, like it's a feat. And to braid history and memoir, I became I'm a much better writer now than I'd ever been. So yeah, it changed me in a lot of ways. Yeah.
And then my last question before I go to audience questions, which is, what do you want people to take away from this? When you think about the person that reads this and then puts it down, what do you want them to say to their homegirl or to their mom? Like, you should read this because this is what I took away from this.
I hope that people walk away with a great sense of the resolve and perseverance of Black Americans in particular, Black people in this country, but also being aware that there are forces tearing around the edges. And so as we are erasing history and we're erasing peoples, lest we forget what people had to get through to get to where we are now, right? But also that this country is culpable in the violence. And it's not our burden alone. So even though Black people experience violence disproportionately, about 46% of the homicides in the country are committed and victimized by white people. The whole other half, we have a gun violence problem. The suicides, right? Police abuses in places where there are no Black people. We have a power issue, right? And so I think I hope people walk away understanding the broader system of how we got here. And if you care about American history, this is American history, right? And so I think those who care about that, hopefully walk away with a fuller sense of that.
Awesome. We're now going to take some questions from you all. We can just pass around the mic. So just put your hands up and we will pass around the mic. Don't be shy, y'all.
Good evening, sorry. You started out talking about the impact of this process on your health. Extrapolate on that in terms of the impact, because we know that trauma and violence has an impact at the genetic level and manifested in disease. So talk a little bit about that, how that is manifesting now in terms of the types of diseases that we're seeing, the impact of healthcare costs, and what that will mean from a policy perspective.
Yeah. I think the biggest one, for me at least, and I think the one that most of us will experience, beyond the broad ideas of epigenetics and high blood pressure, it's the lack of sleep. One of the facts that I discovered that was shocking to me is that the average Black person gets like an hour and a half to 2 hours less sleep than the average white person, right? And what that means to your cardiovascular system and not being able to clear out all the gunk, right? So we see a slew of those kinds of issues. So now you have the hypertension, right? And now the high blood pressure, and now your sugar, and how that impacts the way you move through the world. You're crankier. Now your actual interactions, right? I think that's the biggest one. And we don't recognize the stress as stress. It's normal. For me, as Yamiche mentioned, my stress wouldn't, change the way I engage with people, but I couldn't sleep. And so what I was doing was I would take over-the-counter medicine sometimes. I would take melatonin. I was doing all kind of stuff to try to sleep because I couldn't stop thinking. And what I was thinking about was all the work and the stories and the words I have to write and how I felt during the 10th live hit of the day, right? I think when we think about healthcare debt and the great cost, the early inception of this book was going to get into all of this. But part of this is also like lost labor wages, right? And lost labor itself from people who are missing work because they're just too stressed to get out of bed or they're too sick. And so the costs are exorbitant. Yeah.
Next question. There's a question over here. White.
I didn't really expect to ask this question, but so vocabulary, words matter, right? So you used a term, black on black crime or violence. And so I think it was on NPR today, someone was reflecting on the fact that why do we say black on black crime or violence? We don't say like white on white. And so I wonder if you could say a little, like you use the term today.
I didn't say black on black though.
Hmm?
You said I used the term?
You did.
I did not.
Oh,
I
you
put
did.
$20 on it.
You do. Who's
bad.
recording? I think somebody
I put
is
$20.
in
I
here
put $20 on.
recording.
I put $20
You
on
did.
for real. I really put $20 on.
Okay, so you owe me 20
there's
bucks.
there's a whole part of a chapter about proximity, right? And how Frantz Fanon talked about we won't dare lash out at the colonizer, so we lash out at ourselves, right? And that was part of the whole point of the other 45% were killed by white people, right? So the black on black is just people killing people who it's proximate. And so it is a mythology and a falsity. So yes, I don't believe it, and words do matter. And I hope somebody record it because I want my $20. Yeah. But I did feel you. You have a great point, though. Okay. All right. I'll take 20 from you, too. All right. I'm taking all the bread.
Hi, Trymaine.
Hey, how's it going, Payne?
My question is, what is your hope for the next generation in sharing your story, and what message do you have for the next generation, especially those that are experiencing what you've experienced?
Thank you. I think the biggest takeaway I'd hope is that we have much more agency than we sometimes allow ourselves to believe, even in the face of what seems like insurmountable odds and forces that are greater than ourselves. We have everything we need inside of us. And I think we have to lean on that because it won't come from outside, right? Because for a lot of us, this society has never loved us and doesn't care about us. And it's okay to accept a certain level of anti-blackness, right? That we often also accept because we feel powerless against it. But I think the true power is within us, right? And I think we just need to tap into that. But everything we need, I think that's almost cliche at this point, but everything we need is inside of us. Yeah. Thank you, Pay.
More questions?
Good evening. My question is around family and community. You mentioned, for example, your grandmother, your uncle lived next door, so-and-so was around the corner. A lot of this generation don't have that, haven't grown up with that type of community.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around how to either recreate that, or how do we fill that void?
Yeah. I think one of the biggest issues is this false sense of connection through our devices, right? And so people aren't engaging with each other anymore. There are some upsides, less drunk driving, less teenage pregnancy, less all kind of stuff. But young people aren't engaging with each other anymore, period. I think it's incumbent upon us. We have to find ways to create community. And it's easier in some places in our schools, in our neighborhoods. But I think it's incumbent upon us. We have to reflect back and be very intentional about creating that because they don't have the tools, right? And as long as we keep accepting the status quo, then it will never be fixed. I think we have to find ways. And I think especially now where we're feeling like the pressure's on and it's a dark time, I think now is the time where we're intentional about pouring into each other. But we have to be intentional about pouring into each other. Yeah.
Even though you asked Trymaine this question, I also think I'll answer on behalf of Trymaine, which is he creates community for himself. So even though me and Trymaine aren't related, I would say that he's like my brother. I can call him up. I can deal with stuff if I'm stressed out. I can talk to him. I go see him. So I think there's also this idea of like recreating community that you grew up with. I grew up in Miami. Most of my family is in Miami still, but I've had this sort of Northeast family that I found, like me and one of my really good girlfriends, she has 2 kids and I have a kid. And at some point, I think my nanny called in sick and I was just flipping out. And she's like, girl, I can come take care of your baby. And I was like, oh my God, my mother used to do that. We had to have this like talk where it's like, when something went wrong, like an auntie picked you up, an uncle came to get you. Like there were people that weren't just the people you were paying, which of course it's like, you have the money now. So it's like, oh yeah, I'm going to go get this nanny. And it's great because the life that we're living. That being said, like there is also the like, my friend lives 15 minutes away and I would never think to call her to say like, cause I'm thinking she's, you're an executive at this big company. And she's like, yeah, but girl, it's 4 o'clock. Like if you need your baby to get picked up, like, so the idea of sort of also recreating what some people did out of survival. Like my mother's sort of network was created out of survival. She didn't have the money for somebody else to pick her child up. So she was going to create it for herself. And I think that that's something that I think we can recreate even when we have the means to not have to recreate that. So I think that that's something, just as I'm like growing in my motherhood, to say like, yeah, I don't have to raise this baby on my own. Like I have friends that are right here.
And as they get older, not being afraid to bring the kids with you. So my friends, we bring the kids with you, so they're all seeing that community. And good to see Pay here from Big Brothers Big Sisters. Also like mentoring, being intentional about mentoring children, right? So you're pulling people into the communities that we have. Yeah.
More questions? Yeah.
Thank you. I know you also have a documentary about Hurricane Katrina. Could you talk a bit about the relationship, if there is one, between this book and that documentary and them coming out around the same time?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. There's a whole chapter here in the book about New Orleans and about some of what I experienced during Katrina and what the people of New Orleans experienced during Katrina. And by the time we get to the flood of Katrina, there were a dozen other floods of misuse and abuse of power and corruption by police and politicians. It's terrible. But in the documentary, as we approach the 20th anniversary of the storm, it was important for me, even though I've mastered shining the light in the dark place and wrestling with this and making sure everybody has a little piece of this pain. If they have to experience it, we all need to have a piece of this. The documentary is less about a recitation of the destruction and more about how community heals itself and it's patched itself together. Right, and those closest to the issue have the answers and solutions. And so to see people in New Orleans 20 years later who are literally with their hands in the ground teaching young people how to grow food in communities where there's hunger, right? Or making sure that expectant mothers are healthy as possible. And even when the babies come out and they survive, mental health, right? Or if you don't, what it means to wrap your arms around mothers who are experiencing that, families who are experiencing that. People who are fighting for the very ground beneath their feet, the literal ground beneath their feet, from the encroachment of big industry, let alone the erosion from natural disasters. And to show us strong people, again, tattered, but didn't have anybody to call because everybody let New Orleans down, but they found a way to do it themselves. And so the connection is like, we experience these things, right? These forces that seem to be bigger than us, but we do have agency and power when we come together and we're intentional about healing ourselves. And so but there's a whole chapter in New Orleans in the book. That's probably my favorite. Yeah. Thank you. I love New Orleans, so thank you for that question.
So I have this phrase, right, that says healing starts with knowing, which is this idea that the understanding of the past can help you navigate the present. So your book title is 1,000 Ways to Die. So what is your takeaway for us leaving tonight, focusing on maybe 1,000 ways for us to heal?
Yeah. There's, not to give away some of this book, but in part of this is, you go through 1,000 ways to die, blood clots and bullets and toxic air and all those things, right? The stress. But there are even more ways to live. And that's why, again, the dying hurts so bad. And so I think to put it in that perspective, right? That there is freedom when we fight for ourselves and our lives. But the healing is central. There's a chapter about Black men in particular, about healing the trauma that we carry, the specific kind of as Black men. But you have to address it and name it first. And so I think part of the issue is, I was just in Philly talking to some brothers, and shooting is so routine that somebody, oh yeah, I got shot. You got shot. And you talk about it as a matter of fact, but it is a matter of course in some places. Never realizing that now why you're hyper vigilant, right? But there's in the healing that you can free yourself, unburden yourselves from the weight that we're all carrying. We should collaborate on a second book. I know you're a doctor, right? So we should figure out some way. I think this is the setup for that. But I wanted to point to all the places where we're feeling this pain and what it means to carry that trauma. But that next one, 1,000 Ways to Live, should be the ultimate conclusion to that. Yeah, but you're right on. You're right on, because it's killing us, it's making us sick. The way we're lashing out at our not black on black crime, but we're lashing out people in proximity to us. We're gonna be long friends. I've been talking about this 50 years. You like, I know you said I heard you, and I'm like, I ain't say it. But I think that healing part, and that's the next. And even in this book, I didn't get into it too deeply, but like practical ways of like the breathing. You know, you're holding it for 6 and you're letting out for 4. Like really, the real mindfulness about how we talk to each other, what we're consuming, the social media stuff. I think the next step is like, how do we give folks the tools and resources to do that? Because the healing is so central to this. Thank you.
Hi, friend.
Hey, Disha.
Hey, so I'm so proud of you. I've known Trymaine since he was like 12 or something like that, for 13. But I know that you spent time at Harvard. You were a fellow at Harvard Kennedy School. Do you have plans to take this to an academic setting? Because the reason why I ask that is because I feel like obviously our academics are also being threatened very much so, our black academics. And this kind of history, I feel like, is slipping away.
Yeah.
Where our students are not learning about this. So do you have a plan, or have you thought about taking this to an academic setting, making it a course, or maybe doing another fellowship around your book or something? But I just feel like that's something that's so needed on every level, from high school, community college, regular, like on and on through doctorate. So just wondering about that.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm having those conversations right now because it's many things. It's a memoir-ish, but it's also a history book, right? And we're stepping through history intentionally. There's a professor in Milwaukee who bought 200 and some books, like required reading for his freshmen. And so I think now as the book is getting out there, and it's not just about how to handle trauma, but that's an on-ramp for you. But it's also understanding the industry and policy, right? And history. And so it's set up perfectly for that, but those conversations are happening now. But you're right, I think we have to, because we're not taught the full breadth of American history, we don't really understand ourselves fully. And so it's so important to get them young as the history is being attacked.
Hello.
How you doing?
Thank you for telling such beautiful, hard stories with lots of intellect.
Thank you.
You said something that raised an eyebrow about doing the research with sundown towns from your family background. And I was wondering if you had the opportunity to do any research about the still existing sundown towns that are current. I am from Arkansas, and I just moved to DC in July. And I was raising my child in a town that was a sundown town maybe 6 years ago. And they're starting to bring more people in, which the communities don't like, but the money makes sense. It's also a state that holds the meeting place for the Klan. So there are people in Arkansas that want to tell these hard stories and they want to progress. They want to do more, but they're not as blessed as I am to pick up and just leave and start over. A lot of people speak so much about this being a past thing in history, but it's still real today.
Yeah.
So I just was wondering how you may encourage people that live in close proximity to these things to speak out and be brave, but still know that they can be safe, because they do have to, go home, raise children, things like that.
Well, thank you for that. I think the most important nugget of what you said is that there's no history where it feels like there's this black and white past that's disconnected from now. It's a continuum, and we have to understand it as such. And part of our problem is we think we've evolved as opposed to no, this is the baseline, right? We're going to move around a little bit, but we're going to return to that baseline because it never fully disappeared. And I think part of what you're saying is incumbent upon us as journalists to tell those stories and to go to those places and not be scared to tell those stories, so people feel like they do have a voice and they can chime in and say, well, it's happened in North Carolina too. And let's organize around the narrative and the storytelling. But thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, so important.
We have time for maybe 1 or 2 more questions.
Hi, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
What would you say to Black readers who are exhausted of reading and hearing about these types of stories, Black traumas that, not because they don't exist, but because they're just sort of a constant. We're seeing in the news, we're seeing it on our phones, we're seeing it in books. What would you say to the people who are just, wanting to feel hope and be optimistic in this time, and to learn from books like yours, while also trying to, I guess, maintain the light in their own lives?
Yeah. I think I've had this conversation a lot because part of trying to sell the book and get the book out there is that, like, you won't understand that it's not all trauma until you get to reading it, because it's important for me to point to the thing and say, do you see this in what we're carrying? And it's not his fault. And we've been here before, right? So my thing is like the trauma. I also believe that we have to be healthy enough to say, maybe not yet, but start reading, especially this book in particular, start reading it and you'll get the sense of, no, it's weighty. You might need to put the book down sometimes or not, because at every turn there is the movement and the progress and community. So I was very intentional about that. But we have to be healthy enough to say, like, you know what? I'll let the book call me when it's time, because we have been inundated, but we also don't have the pure luxury of disconnecting, because if we don't, some people don't care at all. And so we're not plugged in and locked in and either angered or encouraged or fueled or dismayed enough to do something. Nobody else will. But I feel you. It's tough. It's hard. Going back to the idea of the videos, I don't share those videos anymore of anybody getting killed and shot. I stopped. Before I was like, no, I don't want to see it. I don't want to put that energy on you, especially out of context. Give us some context. And now I trust you to help move me through. But you're right. I think we need to be more intentional and conscious of what we're taking in. And if you need a breath, take the breath. Yeah.
Anybody last question?
I want to thank. I just want to thank before that question. I do want to thank y'all very much for coming tonight. And it's not easy work, but I think it's necessary work. And I think a lot of people will see themselves and their families in this book. But also there is the strength and resilience of a community that has weathered so much. And again, ain't nothing wrong with us. So I want to point to the other thing and show you what's wrong with us. Thank you. Not to step on your question at all.
A question that I think is a little bit connected to that last question, which is, I think as we are consumers of media, that there's so much mainstream media right now that is disappointing. And I think there's this tension that many of us feel about consuming the news. As you've said, it feels so important, and drawing some boundaries when we are really frustrated with mainstream media organizations. And I think it's hard to know, when we go through various mainstream media organizations, so many of them right now are feeling like, how do I continue to be a subscriber? And there's some great media coming out, and some of those same organizations are doing so much that feels so deeply disappointing. And just any reflections on that balance and how you as journalists are thinking about it and would encourage other people to think about that.
I'm going to be completely honest, okay? And I've gotten paid doing TV stuff. I think you have to turn cable news off often. Check in. Again, Mike's in back camera here. I tune it out myself and I check in to see. I have a couple shows that I'll watch. Don't leave it on, right? I think reading more, right? The context, the history, so that when you arrive at something, you're better informed with it. The news, the TV news, especially the cable news model, is a lot of bickering. It's produced like it's Monday Night Football. And at the end of the day, you're just frustrated because then it's like there's a lot of waffling and you don't know what to believe. And it just can be too much. So I think turning back to the written word is so important. But also just measuring your diet of it. Because again, I'm, as of late, a TV correspondent. I'm actually a writer just masquerading as a TV correspondent, honestly. I just happen to go that direction. But we got to tune it off. Because I think those same companies that were pledging money to George Floyd and black folks and all that stuff, they were all kissing the ring, right? Of an administration, the violence is oozing out of every policy. They're snatching people, chasing people. It's crazy. And these people, the same people are, the gatekeepers to a lot of this media are showing, putting their values where their appearances are, right? And so I think we have to be very intentional. But I think reading more and start with 1,000 Ways to Die: The True Cost of Violence and Black Lives, or any number of books. But I say that seriously, but also joking. There are a lot of great books out right now, especially writers and authors who are approaching these topics, these big, meaty, weighty topics. I see Keisha Blaine's Without Fear up there, Black Women in Movies. Like, there's a lot happening. So there's a lot to read. And you all are readers. That's why you're here, right?
Well, thank you so much to all of you for coming out, for reading the book, planning to read the book, for taking the time to really hear Trymaine in his fullness. It's so great to see you, and so proud of you for this book. Because now, of course, I'm going to ask you how to write books. So that's going to be what I'm going to be doing
one
next
word
year.
at a time. That's
Right. So thank you so much to all these. Trymaine is going to be signing some books. He already signed my book because I was like, I want to make sure my book's already signed. But he's going to be signing some books here. So thank you so much again. And thank you, Trymaine.
Thank you.
And all of you.
Thank you, Yamiche. Thank you, Yamiche. And thank all of you. Thank you. Thank you.